was 14, in my bedroom, lost in the glow of the TV screen. My room had been converted from an attic space, which meant the ceiling was paper-thin and connected directly to the vast, dusty expanse above. I was used to the occasional creaks and groans of the old house settling, the distant muffled sounds of my family downstairs, but there was one sound that night that made me jump. A loud, sharp crack echoed directly above me, so jarring and loud it sounded like a gunshot. It made my heart pound in my chest. I almost got a step-ladder to pull down the attic door and investigate, but a familiar fear stopped me. That attic had been my childhood boogeyman, a place I had avoided my entire life. I told myself it was just the constant pressure of old boxes on the ceiling, a thought I clung to with a desperate hope. At dinner, I mentioned the sound to my mom, a casual complaint that quickly turned into a genuine plea for reassurance. She just smiled and told me there was nothing up there but old junk, and with a playful wink, a few mice. I was somewhat relieved, but the memory lingered. Later that night, long after my family had gone to bed, I was still up, playing video games with the volume turned low so as not to wake anyone. In the silence, I heard it again, a different sound this time, not a crack, but a soft rhythmic thump. It was constant and purposeful, a slow, deliberate rhythm that sounded exactly like footsteps. My hands began to sweat on the controller. The thumping stopped directly above the attic door. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise itself. I stared at the door, my entire body tense with anticipation. My imagination was a runaway train, but no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, the sounds were too deliberate, too human. I got out of bed as quietly as I could, my feet bare on the cold floor. The stepladder was in the corner. I grabbed it, placed it under the door, and with a shaky hand, pulled. The door came down with a soft thud. I peered into the black void of the attic, shining my phone's flashlight into the darkness. Just piles of old boxes and furniture. My paranoia, I told myself, was getting the better of me. I pushed the door back up, got back into bed, and finally fell into an exhausted sleep. After a few hours, the thumping started again. It was louder this time, more insistent. I felt a surge of adrenaline, but before I could even sit up, I saw it. The attic door, which I had just closed, slowly began to lower. It wasn't falling, it was being pulled down with slow, deliberate force. The silence that followed was suffocating. I got out of bed, grabbing my phone, and tiptoed to my mom's room. "Something is in my room," I whispered, my voice shaking. "In the attic." My mom, seeing the raw terror on my face, nudged me to stay in her room. She went to get my older brothers, both of whom were far too sensible to believe me. I stood in the dark, straining to hear. A moment later, I heard a loud commotion from my room. My brothers yelling, my mom screaming for them to come back. They had gone up into the attic and found nothing. I was relieved, but also confused. They had heard the noise, but they hadn't seen the door open. They were skeptical. The sounds never happened again after that night, but every time I hear a crack in the ceiling, I can't help but stare at that attic door. I rented a small, single-family house to be close to my new job. It was meant to be temporary, just for a few months, but from the moment I met the landlords, I knew it would be a strange experience. He was an unsettling man with a cold, dry demeanor and an unblinking stare. The house itself was decent, but he was a strange, uncooperative figure. When I asked about the attic, I noticed there was a small lock on the door. I called him the next day to ask about a key. "The attic is off limits," he told me flatly. It was never included in the rent. I wasn't sure if that was legal, but the price was right, and I didn't want to make things difficult. My first few weeks in the house were uneventful, but then I started to notice small, unsettling things. One morning, I went to grab the milk for my cereal, and the carton felt suspiciously light. I had just bought it. Surely I hadn't gone through that much. I dismissed it as an oversight on my part. The next day, some of my cold cuts were missing. My mind raced. Was I going crazy? Was someone coming in and taking my food? The paranoia was a slow burn, a creeping sense of unease that I couldn't shake. I started looking into buying a camera system. That night, after a few hours of research, I went to bed, but the feeling of being watched kept me awake. Around 4 a.m., a sudden urgent need to use the bathroom made me get out of bed. As I tiptoed down the hallway, my eyes darted to the attic door. The lock was gone. The door was slightly ajar. A wave of pure dread washed over me. I grabbed a heavy, heavy-duty flashlight from my room and crept toward the open door. The pulled-down ladder was down. I had to see. I had to know. I climbed the ladder into the attic. The flashlight illuminated a huge space, much bigger than I expected. But what I saw in the corner made my blood run cold. There was a twin bed, a clothing hamper, and a TV mounted on the wall. On the screen was a live feed of my bedroom. The light from the TV had been so dim I hadn't even noticed it. Then a low sound made me turn my head. At the entrance to the attic, someone was crawling toward me. I knew it was the landlord. His face was dry and emotionless, his eyes wide as he crawled on his hands and knees. He raised a finger to his lips, making a long, drawn-out "sheh." I was paralyzed by a fear so intense I couldn't move. He reached for me, but I dodged him, scrambling back down the ladder, my mind screaming. I slammed the door shut and ran. I ran out of the house, my phone in my hand, and called the police. They found him the next day at his brother's house, but I never went back. I moved into an apartment 2 days later, and I can tell you one thing: I will never buy a house with an attic. When my brother, sister, and I were kids, we loved to play hide and seek when we were home alone. It was a chance to have the whole house to ourselves. We always played in teams of 1 seeker and 2 hiders, with a 5-minute timer for the seeker to find us. One day, I decided to try a new spot: the attic. It was a place we had never thought of before, a secret space with its own set of rules. I went into the big walk-in closet in the hallway, and then climbed into the attic. It was a dark, cramped space, but I was determined to win this round. I found a big black bag and a few boxes and squeezed myself behind them, a perfect hiding spot. My heart was pounding, the perfect mix of excitement and anxiety. The silence in the attic was so profound I could almost hear my own pulse. I was so focused on the timer in my head that I didn't even hear the sound of the attic door opening. I felt a sudden shift in the air, a presence that was not my own, then a loud crinkle. A big plastic bag was being crumpled. My mind raced. It was my brother trying to scare me. I stayed silent, waiting out the timer, a smug grin on my face. The timer went off, a soft, high-pitched beep that broke the silence. "We win," I yelled, my voice echoing in the darkness. But there was no reply. The crinkling stopped. The silence returned, more unsettling now than before. I knew one of them was messing with me, and I was determined to get my revenge. I walked back to the attic door, my phone's flashlight ready. I turned on the light, and in the beam, I saw a flash of someone's head ducked behind a wall of boxes. It was a short haircut. My brother. I called his name, my voice dripping with mock accusation, and walked toward the boxes. I was ready to jump out and scare him, to claim victory. But I wasn't the one who was going to do the scaring. As I got closer to the boxes, a figure slowly stood up. It wasn't my brother. It was a grown man. He put a finger to his lips and said, "Don't freak out." That's exactly what I did. I screamed a high-pitched, childish shriek and ran for my life, scrambling out of the attic and down the stairs. I found my brother and sister waiting in the living room. "Run," I yelled, my voice raw with terror. "There's someone in the attic." They heard the panic in my voice, and we all ran, not stopping until we reached our neighbor's house. They called the police and our parents for us. The police came, but of course, the intruder was gone. I can't prove it to this day, but I know what I saw. I know it happened.